Brandon Swanson. On the night of the 14th of May 2008, in the quiet farmlands of western Minnesota, 20-year-old Brandon Swanson had just finished his freshman year at Minnesota West Community and Technical College. Like many college students, he spent the evening celebrating the end of the semester with friends before beginning the drive back to his parents' home in Marshall, Minnesota. Shortly after midnight, Brandon began driving home alone in his green Chevrolet Lumina. It was a route he had driven before, but sometime during the trip, he took a wrong turn onto unfamiliar gravel roads. Around 1:54 a.m., while traveling along Lincoln County Road 3 near the small town of Taunton, his car slid into a ditch and became stuck. He wasn't injured, but there was no way to get the vehicle back onto the road. Instead of calling a tow truck or emergency services, Brandon called his parents. He calmly explained that his car was stuck and asked if they could come pick him up. Believing he knew exactly where he was, Brandon gave his parents directions over the phone. They immediately left home and began driving toward the location. But there was one major problem. Brandon had mistakenly identified where he was. He believed he was near the town of Lind, but investigators later determined he was actually several miles away near Taunton. As a result, Brandon and his parents were searching completely different areas. For nearly half an hour, they drove back and forth along the roads Brandon described, flashing their headlights and honking the horn. Brandon insisted he couldn't see or hear them, while his parents were equally confused because there was no sign of him. Realizing they weren't going to find each other, Brandon decided to leave his car behind and walk toward what he believed were the lights of Lind. Staying on the phone with his father the entire time, he crossed gravel roads, climbed over fences, and carefully made his way through open farmland. During the conversation, he even mentioned crossing a small stream and reassured his father that he was okay. For the next 47 minutes, the call continued without any sign that something was wrong. Then, without warning, Brandon suddenly exclaimed, "Oh shit." His father immediately asked what had happened, but there was no response. The line remained connected for a few moments before the call disconnected. Despite repeatedly calling Brandon's phone, no one ever heard his voice again. As daylight broke, one of the largest search operations in the area's history began. Hundreds of volunteers, search and rescue teams, tracking dogs, helicopters, and law enforcement officers searched the fields, rivers, abandoned farmsteads, and wooded areas surrounding where Brandon was last believed to have been. Investigators eventually located his abandoned Chevrolet Lumina exactly where he had described it, but Brandon himself was nowhere to be found. Over the years, investigators have explored several possibilities. One theory is that Brandon accidentally fell into the nearby Yellow Medicine River during the darkness and was swept away by the current. Others believe he may have fallen into an abandoned well, drainage ditch, or another hidden hazard common in rural farmland. Foul play has also been considered, but investigators have never uncovered evidence proving another person was involved. More than 17 years later, Brandon Swanson's disappearance remains one of Minnesota's most haunting unsolved mysteries. No trace of him has ever been found, and no one knows what caused him to utter those final two words before vanishing into the darkness. Johnny Goes. Our next case takes us back to the early morning of the 5th of September 1982, in the quiet suburb of West Des Moines, Iowa. It was a Sunday morning, and like he had done countless times before, 12-year-old Johnny Gosh woke up before sunrise to deliver newspapers along his neighborhood route. It seemed like an ordinary morning, but within the next hour, Johnny would disappear without a trace, becoming one of the most famous missing children in American history. At approximately 5:45 a.m., Johnny left his family's home carrying a wagon loaded with newspapers. It was common for him to complete the route by himself, and his parents had never had a reason to worry. The neighborhood was considered safe, and Johnny knew every street along his route. As he began making deliveries, several witnesses noticed unusual activity. One neighbor later reported seeing a blue Ford Fairmont slowly driving through the area. According to witnesses, the driver appeared to stop and speak with Johnny, asking him for directions. Johnny briefly answered before continuing with his newspaper deliveries. A short time later, another witness reported seeing a tall man dressed in dark clothing standing near the newspaper route. Investigators later learned that the man had also been seen speaking with Johnny moments before he vanished. At around 7 a.m., customers began calling the newspaper company to report that their newspapers had never arrived. Concerned, Johnny's father, John Gosh, drove the route himself. As he searched the neighborhood, he discovered Johnny's red newspaper wagon abandoned on the sidewalk. Newspapers were scattered across the street, but Johnny was nowhere to be found. Police immediately launched a massive search of the neighborhood. Officers, volunteers, helicopters, and tracking dogs searched nearby parks, drainage ditches, fields, and surrounding neighborhoods. Detectives interviewed dozens of witnesses, but despite the extensive investigation, no physical evidence explaining Johnny's disappearance was ever found. As the years passed, the case attracted national attention, and became one of the first missing child investigations to receive widespread media coverage across the United States. Johnny's photograph appeared on milk cartons, making him one of the earliest children featured in the national campaign to help locate missing kids. His disappearance also played a major role in raising public awareness about child abductions and eventually contributed to changes in how missing children were investigated nationwide. Over the decades, investigators explored numerous leads. Some believed Johnny had been abducted by a stranger passing through the neighborhood. Others suspected a more organized child trafficking operation. One of the most controversial claims came years later, when Johnny's mother, Noreen Gosh, said that in 1997, an adult man appeared at her home in the middle of the night and identified himself as Johnny. According to her account, they spoke privately for about an hour before he left. However, law enforcement has never been able to verify that this meeting actually occurred, and no evidence has ever confirmed the claim. More than 4 decades later, Johnny Gosh has never been found. No one has ever been charged in connection with his disappearance, and despite thousands of tips and years of investigation, the case remains officially unsolved. Jason Landry. On the night of the 13th of December 2020, 21-year-old Texas State University student Jason Landry left his apartment in San Marcos, Texas, to drive home for Christmas break. His destination was Missouri City, where his parents were waiting for him. It was a drive of just over 3 hours, and everything about the trip seemed completely normal. But before Jason could make it home, something happened on a quiet country road that investigators still can't explain. At around 11 p.m., Jason began the drive in his 2014 Nissan Altima. Throughout the trip, he exchanged text messages with his father, letting him know he was on his way. Nothing in those conversations suggested anything was wrong. But shortly after midnight, Jason never arrived. Around 12:31 a.m. on December 14, a passing motorist discovered Jason's car crashed along Salt Flat Road near Luling, Texas. The front of the vehicle had left the roadway and struck a tree. At first glance, it appeared to be a simple traffic accident. However, when deputies arrived, they realized something didn't make sense. Jason was nowhere to be found. His wallet, cell phone, laptop, and several personal belongings were recovered near the crash site. Some of his clothing, including a pair of shorts, was found scattered along the roadway, while other items were located nearby. There were no obvious signs of a violent struggle, no evidence that another vehicle had been involved, and nothing that clearly explained where Jason had gone after leaving the crash scene. Tracking dogs followed Jason's scent away from the vehicle for a short distance before it suddenly disappeared. Investigators searched the surrounding ranches, fields, ponds, and wooded areas using helicopters, drones, K-9 units, and hundreds of volunteers. Despite one of the largest search efforts in the region, no trace of Jason was ever found. As investigators continued piecing together Jason's final hours, they determined that he had somehow ended up on the isolated Salt Flat Road after taking a wrong turn. Why he left the highway remains unknown. Detectives also examined every aspect of Jason's personal life. They reviewed his phone records, digital activity, recent communications, and the people he had been in contact with before he disappeared. Like many missing person investigations, those closest to Jason, including friends and former relationships, were interviewed as part of the inquiry. However, authorities have never publicly identified anyone close to Jason as a suspect, and no evidence has emerged linking a former girlfriend or anyone else in his personal life to his disappearance. Over the years, investigators have explored several possibilities. One theory suggests Jason may have suffered a head injury in the crash, become disoriented, and wandered into the surrounding countryside before succumbing to the harsh conditions. Another possibility is that he encountered someone after leaving the crash site. However, investigators have never found evidence proving foul play, and no single theory has been confirmed. Today, Jason Landry remains missing. Despite years of searches, thousands of tips, and an ongoing investigation, no one knows what happened after he stepped away from his wrecked car on that cold December night. His disappearance remains one of Texas's most puzzling modern missing person cases, a mystery that continues to haunt investigators.